All right, it looks like we are ready to go. Hello, everyone. I will share my screen with you in just a second and pull up our presentation for today. All right, can everyone see the first slide of our presentation?
You are good.
Wonderful, wonderful. Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Rakowski, and today I will be presenting the first installment of Many Hands, People Who Made the Wisconsin Museum of Quilts and Fiber Arts. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, the American Quilt Study Group. Today's presentation will be a brief introduction to the history of the museum, a short overview, if you will, but we'll have more oral history presentations going in depth into the different aspects of the museum's foundation and history in the future. Just to introduce myself a bit, I've been working as an intern for the Wisconsin Museum of Quilts and Fiber Arts this year, recording oral histories. I'm a current graduate student at UW-Milwaukee, working towards my master's in library and information science and museum studies, which is of course how I found out about this wonderful opportunity. It's been my honor to help the museum in their 10th anniversary year to collect oral histories from some of the people who were most instrumental to its founding and its ongoing success. Some of the people who I've spoken with, their past board members, volunteers, and founding mothers, of course. Just to give you an idea of the scope for this project, I've completed 18 interviews in total. And from those interviews, I got over 17 hours of footage. So lots of wonderful stories, not only about these women themselves and their relationship to quilting and fiber arts, but of course their relationship to the museum and to one another. The stories shared in these oral histories will be used for the museum going forward for things like an entryway video, volunteer training, and naturally the following oral history presentations that we have planned. There are so many more people that could have been interviewed and who were recommended to me. So I could have had even more interviews and more footage, but unfortunately, I had to stop somewhere. So you may be wondering why it's important to collect oral histories when we can easily write down a narrative about how and when the museum started. Typically, as a culture, Americans, we are very focused on like linear presentations and kind of getting straight to the facts. And oral histories can be a little bit more tangential, but this can be a huge benefit because then they serve as a rich primary source for us to look back on, and because they share the individual accounts, which provide depth to the museum's history, because you get not just that overarching example of what happened from start to finish, but you get all of the stories of how that happened specifically. Because at the end of the day, this museum didn't simply spring to life. It's the result of years of hard work and dedication by people who believed that fiber arts deserve recognition as the art form that they are, and for the skill that it takes to create them. The WMQFA is more than just a beautiful place for stunning works of art like the one you can see on your screen right now, which was presented in one of the 2015 exhibits, I believe. It is a community at its heart, at its core, because that is what started this museum and that is what has carried it to today. The community of people primarily fiber artists, but also people who recognize their importance, who supported the museum and its earlier project. It started out as a vision and it became a reality. But as I've mentioned, there's the how, there's the nitty-gritty details of how does an organization form, literally from the ground up. Lots of time, effort, and determination by those members, by those early founding mothers who had the vision and who saw the worth in what has been primarily a women's craft in this country. So, of course, I had to share this photo of the museum as it stands today, with the entryway building. And you can see on the right, the barn, the originator for everything, the exhibit space that we've come to know and love, because a lot of work went into creating this building. But before we get ahead of ourselves and the wonderful museum that we have today, we need to rewind a little bit, because before there was ever a museum, before there was even really an idea for building a museum, a group of women had a vision for the Wisconsin Quilt History Project, which started officially in 1988, documenting quilts across the state. This group of women, many of them belonged to the North Shore quilting group, although not all, no blanket statements. And these women formed this group, which then became the driving force behind the creation of the museum as we know it today. Here we've got a clip from Luella Doss, one of the founding mothers for the museum and for the Wisconsin Quilt History Project, which at its foundation was about documenting the quilts and the stories connected to them so that this history wouldn't be lost. I'll let Luella speak for herself here.
The Wisconsin Quilt History Project started with this show called Spirit America. See that? And I spent $10,000 in advertising in order to get the word out all over the state through this show. And so, yeah, it's a pilot program, Wisconsin Quilt Project, documenting Wisconsin quilts made from 1800 to 1900. It was actually 1950. Statewide research, free admission, open to persons bringing Wisconsin quilts dated 1800 to 1900. They will be historically documented and photographed for possible historical publication in the future. Contact Luella Doss at 414-377-911. So that was the first quilt day at Reserve. And it was at a show called Spirit America, which was held down in Milwaukee.
So as you can see, it started out all surrounding the documentations. But eventually it grew, and Luella here will mention some of the impetus and the reasoning behind why it grew, and really it stems to the passion for fiber arts.
That was the reason that we felt starting the quilt museum was so important, that each quilt has a person's heart and mind and soul involved with it, and the family history, and all those things. They're just so important to people who are kind of in the thread of a quilt.
Love in every stitch, the way that so much love has gone into the foundation of this museum and the community surrounding it. And of course, the documentation didn't stop there. The project grew, and which is what led to their growing ambitions later to form a museum of what to do with all of this documentation, with all of this history, with all of these stories. And then here Maribeth will give us an idea of just kind of how broad, how widespread the documentation efforts were.
Started out that they were like the founding mothers, and I think it's 49 counties in Wisconsin, and went and did publicity that they were doing documentations of quilts, and encouraged people to come and bring their items and photograph them and sew the label on the back. And part of it was a fundraiser, and the other part was just collecting all the stories and online.
So collecting stories, something that was central to my work with the Oral History Project, but central to the museum's mission as well. One of the other founding mothers, Marion Wolf, and this is her daughter, Ann King, talking a little bit about that.
Well, she was involved with the initial group of when there was a board established, and throughout the years of that board, she had been president for a few years in there and held other offices as well. So it almost seemed like it was the same group of women, some small group of women, and then they would change out, well, okay, if you're going to be president, then I'll be the treasurer or something like that. So they were all involved in an integral part of establishing the board and then moving on from there as far as what was going to happen next.
And from that small group of women grew the volunteer network that we have today. And then here's another clip from Anne sharing the names of some of those other early members.
Sharon Timpey and Kay Walters, and I'm going to get to see Kay when I'm there. I'm so excited about that. And Luella Doss, part of that group. Warnicki, Ann Hill, she has passed away.
Anne's mentioned something that makes this project even more poignant. Many of the founding, well, I shouldn't say many, but some of the founding mothers and early volunteers that made this work possible have already passed. And so it makes recording the histories even more important, because once someone's gone, you can't get their perspective anymore. And so I tried to focus on collecting some of their stories through everyone else to help memorialize their work with the museum. Ellie Delia is another person that I spoke with, and this will be kind of a transition from talking about those early days and the history project to the period when we're planning the museum but hadn't broken ground yet.
There was quite a span of time from the date that they bought the farm to the time that we broke ground. Well, it was over 10 years. So when I came along in 2008, they had done the historical study, which became a foundation to pursue a significant matching grant, which I'm sure Kate told you the details about that. And so they had been raising money for 10 years and had gotten to the point where they had more or less $1 million, depending on what they were paying out for architectural plans and whatever else. And so I came in 2008, and that effort had been underway all of those years. And
at that point, it really had stalled. They had exhausted some of the larger potential resources and grants and whatever else, and they were looking for a treasurer. And I filled that role.
So Ellie was one of the, I'm going to say, one of the new blood members. She kind of helped. She was one of the newer members that joined and started pushing to help them, the existing group, get over the hump to getting the museum built, because they had been carrying this project for so long that sometimes it just needs, you need a little help, you need a little extra help and input from someone with a different perspective. And this is an anecdote on how the barn was refurbished and when it was lifted.
Did you know that they lifted the whole barn up off of its foundation? Because that was all milking parlors for the cows down underneath there. And so that's how it originally began. You could see the stalls, but the walls were kind of deteriorating, and it was really easy to lift it up and rebuild the foundation and just plop it back down and down.
So the original barn structure was, of course, not a recommended environment for hosting exhibits, and particularly with delicate textiles. So refurbishing that and repairing the foundation was a huge process that's key to the museum existing as we know it today. But just so exciting to see it literally lifted in the air with a crane. And then, of course, after the museum building was built and the barn was refurbished, how do we go about running it, and what's the amount of effort that continues? Because again, this has been a push that started with the project in 1988.
We had finished a capital campaign, we built the building, we got it open, and we were all exhausted, and it was time to have somebody in charge and take the pressure off of all of us. We all stayed on the board and had significant input to, you remember, this is a clean slate. We were sort of making things up as we went along. We were fashioning the mold as we went along. So the people in the executive committee and the board, we were still very, very actively involved, not only in the strategic development of the museum, but we were doing the day-to-day work. For example, I was still the treasurer, still paying the bills. Another person was doing membership. All the jobs that had to be done to keep the museum going were being filled by board members until we were able to put some staff on.
So now that the museum was built, it was time to look towards hiring staff to fill some of the roles that have been previously all volunteer. And many of these continue to be filled by volunteer. Like the gift shop is a volunteer-run part of the museum, which is beautiful and ongoing from this legacy. So not only did everyone leave their mark on the museum, but it's left one on them, because people have formed lasting friendships through this museum and joining this community. So it's something that for everyone that I spoke with has become a huge part of their lives. Just to wrap up, I would like to thank all of these women who I spoke with. Their input will be further shared for those who didn't get into this original introductory presentation. Without them, I wouldn't be speaking with you today. And without them, we wouldn't have the museum that we know and love today. So that is it for my presentation, this introduction to the oral histories and of the museum. Have there been any questions shared or anything that you'd like to know in further upcoming presentations?
Michelle, were there any surprises that came out as you were doing interviews?
Surprises. Well, as someone who doesn't have a lot of firsthand experience with quilting, it was really fascinating getting to learn more about that art. And then something that I didn't realize at first when I started was kind of that gap period between when they had the idea for the museum and actually getting it built. I didn't realize when I first started the amount of time and effort it took just to get to that point. And it's something that you don't, in my, as a student, you don't really get to see that creation process. So getting to hear about it through the words and experiences of the women who helped during that period was really inspiring.
We don't have any other questions. So I'd like to extend our thanks for joining us. As Michelle mentioned, please stay tuned. This is the first in a series. And again, thank you once again to the American Quilt Study Group for helping to sponsor this program.